From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's ahead. During our first half hour today, a detailed look at 2019 agricultural land value trends here in Kansas. Those are summarized in two new K-State reports. And K-State's Mykel Taylor will be along to compare 2019 dryland and irrigated cropland and pasture values to those of 2018. Additionally, she'll project where agricultural land values may be headed here in 2020, with special consideration given, of course, to the impact of COVID-19 on the land market. Also today, our weekly horticulture segment, K-State's Dennis Patton will go over the basics of raising garden vegetables in containers. Plus more right here on this Agriculture Today.
For information on threatening weather, you should depend on the National Weather Service and their broadcast on NOAA Weather Radio. NOAA Weather Radio is an all-hazards radio network that provides up-to-the-minute weather information, including life-saving warnings anytime, day or night. NOAA Weather Radio also broadcasts information on man-made disasters, such as chemical spills, Amber Alerts, or other national emergencies. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. As always, thanks for tuning in as we pass along to you during this part of the broadcast important new information on farm and ranch land values in Kansas, based on a pair of reports that you producers can now find at the agmanager.info website out of K-State Agricultural Economics. Talking with us now, one of those involved in gathering all of this and compiling the information for use by farmers, ranchers, and others, Mykel Taylor, agricultural economist with K-State Research and Extension. Mykel, we talk about this series of numbers every year. This is information that producers can lean on to get a handle on where the land value situation stands right now, right?
Yes. So, Eric, remember that we are in Kansas, which is a non-disclosure state. So we don't have the ability as everyday people to just find out what everybody's paying for land, whether it's an auction or a private treaty or just any kind of sale. So it's something that K-State, in conjunction with the Kansas Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers and the Property Valuation Department in Topeka, have come together to put together a couple of publications that really give us some sense of what's going on in the market, taking a couple different angles at looking at it, but just giving people a sense of the broader marketplace beyond what you can observe with just local sales or local auction sales.
Well, we want to talk of trends, of course, here, but compare and contrast these two reports that you have on Ag Manager. One is the report on Kansas county-level land values for cropland and pasture, and the other is the Kansas Land Values Book. Are they based on similar data, different sets of data? What have you here?
Well, they are based on exactly the same data, but we do two different types of analysis on the data to give you two different types of books. So the Land Value Book, which I did with Robin Reed, an extension associate here in the department, we put together the summary statistics of all of those land sales by region and county of the state. So the idea was to have some summary stats like averages, minimums, maximums, counts, so on. So you could really get a sense of, by region of the state, what was going on in the market in terms of sales. The other publication, the Extension Bulletin, which is county level land values, is a statistical model where we take the same data and put it into a model and kick out what would be the county average land value after you've taken into account quality of the land, size of parcel, location, so on and so forth. So it's a quality adjusted average estimate, whereas the Land Values Book is just simple summary statistics.
And you would recommend that interested parties have a look at both of these to broaden their understanding of land value trends currently?
Yeah, absolutely. The Land Values Book, this is only the second year, so you can get a sense of what's going on in the marketplace. The publication, the county level land values, has been going on for several years, and so we're able to track trends in that one. So we can show you a little bit about what's been going on over the last 5 or 6 years. in both publications, but you get just a slightly different look at what things are going on, depending on which publication you look at.
Very well. Right to then the trends in 2019 as these reports captured them, and whether in fact we saw further erosion in farmland values this past year. What do the numbers tell us, Mykel?
So the simple summary statistics that are in the land book tell us that we've pretty much been holding steady on non-irrigated land, if not slightly, up by a point or so. But once we adjust for quality, the quality of the land that's been selling in the marketplace, which actually has been declining over the last couple of years, the NRCS rating of the soil quality index for parcels sold over the last 3 years has been on a downward trend. And once you adjust for that, we actually see with non-irrigated cropland a 7% drop between 18 and 19 in statewide land values. Now, I always caution people that land markets are local. And so while there are overarching trends that we can look at and see where Kansas farmland is going, we have to keep in mind that local land markets can behave very differently depending on the supply of land, quality of land, quantity of bidders, and so forth.
So these are not obviously absolute numbers for every situation. What about irrigated farmland? How did that fare in 2019?
Irrigated farmland actually dropped off by about 17%, which is a pretty big drop off for irrigated farmland. And one of the things I always caution people when it comes to the irrigated farmland is we just don't have that many sales to work with. And so a 17% drop this year can actually be reflective of the fact that it could be that the land that was sold, the irrigated land that was sold, maybe had further to go in terms of the depth of the well, depth to water. It could be lower quality land. There could be several reasons for that dip in the irrigated land values statewide. So we only actually publish the land values for irrigated ground for the western third of the state and the south central part of the state. And so you can take a look at those and see that they've dropped off. But I just caution people that number is a little dicey to estimate just because of the quantity of irrigated farmland that we see for sale.
And do want to include a word here on pasture value, which remained fairly stable comparatively, you say.
It did. It only dropped off 1%, which I consider to be essentially flat between 18 and 19, so that we don't have too much of a change there. And just differences between farm profitability on the cow-calf side and stocker side versus the crop side. We've had lower commodity prices, but that also means lower input costs for cattle producers. So there's been a little bit more strength on the cow-calf side historically. We're looking at an entire year's worth of transactions. So that doesn't necessarily reflect what's going on right now.
But back to the cropland, and one of the factors here that you cited a couple of times, the quality of land being sold, and that you've talked of before is the circumstance where producers, if they need to part with land for whatever financial reason, they tend to let go of that poor quality land initially. That's at play here too?
I think that's a component of it. We've never been able to look at the quality of the land that's being sold. And so this is kind of an interesting trend to pick up on, is that it's been on the decline for the last 2 or 3 years. And one of the stories that I can tell about that is that we saw an increase in the amount of debt that was being carried by Kansas Farm Management Association farms, which reflects about over 2,000 farms statewide. So you get a real sense of what's going on with all Kansas farms when you look at the KFMA data. And that increased level of debt is something that, at some point they have to service. They have to find a way to pay back that debt. And for some people, selling off a chunk of land is a way that they do it. And if you think about, human nature, which piece of ground are you going to sell first if you have to sell off a piece of your portfolio? Well, the lowest quality land is probably the one that you're going to try to sell first if you can, or the one that doesn't fit best with your operation because maybe it's located really far from your home base, or just pieces of land that are not your highest and best use in your operation that might fit somebody else better. But lower quality is one of the characteristics that we've seen in the land parcels that are being sold recently.
Before we take a break here, Mykel, want to bring up that the USDA also puts out land value numbers, and one might be comparing what you've developed here at K-State to the USDA's, and they're not always in lockstep in terms of percentage changes, but the trends, you say, tend to be very much parallel.
The trends tend to be parallel with the exception of the 2019 number. The 2019 number for cropland was actually up a percentage point, and we have it down 7%. So it's the difference between a survey and using market data. Right. And a survey of people who are in the market and their impressions of what's going on in the marketplace can be different than what we have with actual market sales.
And the USDA uses a survey.
Yeah, and USDA uses a survey. So that's probably the biggest difference between the two is I don't always expect them to be in lockstep simply because the data gathering process is different between the two of them. And so that can lead to some minor differences in the estimate.
Back to the two reports on agmanager.info on land value trends in Kansas 2019, how you would like to see interested parties, farmers, ranchers, and otherwise make use of that information. Mykel.
Well, I'd really like them to take a look at it just to get a sense of what's going on in their area, remembering that neither of these reports is going to tell you what your individual piece of land is worth. That's what an appraiser does. But instead that you'll get a sense of where things are at and what we're seeing in the market, and use that to sort of help you make informed decisions about how you're going forward with your operation and whether or not you're in the market to buy or sell land.
Well, Mykel, we need to step aside for a few moments. When we come back, we'd like to talk of what may be ahead in agricultural land values in 2020 here in Kansas. And there are new variables affecting that, obviously. Mykel Taylor is with us, agricultural economist with K-State Research and Extension, sharing information on the land value reports just out from K-State and posted online for your review, producers. We'll return after you hear this over the K-State Radio Network. You're tuned to Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Keeping your distance from others is important in slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are some fun things to do alone. Read a book, take a walk, unpack your suitcase from that trip you took last September, paint a self-portrait, catch up on a TV series, do a puzzle. Remember, we should all stay home to lower the risk for everyone. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
We're back now on Agriculture Today and visiting with K-State Research and Extension agricultural economist Mykel Taylor. She was among those here at the university who recently contributed heavily to two reports out of K-State on agricultural land values in Kansas, which are both online at agmanager.info. A few moments ago, Mykel, we talked of what those reports have to share to those interested in those land value trends. But here we are in 2020. We don't have the numbers in yet, obviously. We're only in the month of April. But questions swirling about the economic impacts of the coronavirus situation and how those might weigh on farm and ranch land values in this calendar year. There's a great lot of unknown associated with this.
A great bit of unknown. That's the thing is that we're only into the second quarter. So I was able to get first quarter land sales, but that really doesn't show the impact of COVID-19 on first quarter land sales in Kansas because things were still rolling relatively normally in that period. So what we're really going to want to see is second quarter land sales if we're going to pick up on anything with regard to the impact on the market. And so we'll be able to do an update, I would say probably in August, about what's been going on with the second quarter. But up until that point, we are going to have to just sort of think through some of the factors that we see around that might be affecting land values.
And as a matter of fact, that was the core of a successful webinar that you and other agricultural economists at K-State hosted several days ago on this very topic of 2020 farm and ranch land values in the wake of the COVID situation. Let's tick through some of those things that came up during that conversation. One Interest rates remain low, you pointed out, which will help with land sales to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely. So if mortgage rates are low, then it's going to continue to support purchasing land. It gives people more money to buy land with as opposed to paying interest. So it's with lower mortgage rates, I think that that's going to keep some strength up on the demand side for land. It's also going to help those who already own land with the ability to refinance if they need to and get a better payment on that land. So I think there's a strength towards the market with low interest rates.
One of the questions associated with that, though, is will agricultural producers be able to be active participants as buyers in those markets? Because, as we well know, commodity markets have taken a major shot from COVID-19.
Right. So, again, we look at net farm income. And in 2018 and 2019, one of the defining characteristics of net farm income was the percentage that was comprised of government payments from the market facilitation payments. And that was a significant chunk. It was about between 40 and 50% both years of government payments. And so going into 2020, we're going to need another round of stimulus payments, I think, to keep that net farm income up because the commodity prices have fallen off so dramatically that, net farm income is likely to be lower than it has been the last 2 years. But if we have stimulus payments, that might keep it up roughly around the $100,000 mark, which is where we've seen net farm income for the last 2 years.
You made the point in the webinar by that same token, Mykel, that stimulus funds such as may be forthcoming and what may have been realized from the market facilitation program payments earlier, those are artificial supports to the agricultural land market.
Right. And so they're going to do two things. They're going to allow some producers to buy land that might not otherwise choose to buy land, given the cash flow situation that we've been in for the last couple of years. And the other thing that they're going to do is keep rental rates up. Again, if we're given stimulus dollars, we don't have to share it directly with our landowner, but we'll end up bidding it into the price of land because we've got the money to use it. And so we don't want to lose that land. And so we'll keep our rents up in order to keep the land. And that stimulus money will go towards that effort. So the stimulus money ends up being an important piece of the puzzle in that land market, both from a rents and a value standpoint.
Have to ask this, in the absence of such stimulus money, though, one wonders where land values would trail from there.
Well, it's anybody's guess, but I'm happy to be anybody, if you like,
Sure.
And tell you that it was a couple of years ago that Alan Featherstone, and I did a little bit of an analysis where commodity prices were versus land values and what land value would be supported with the new lower commodity prices that we've been facing for the last few years. And the drop off from the peak was estimated to be anywhere between 30 and 50%. Well, we've already dropped off about 25 to 30% statewide in land values. So if we didn't have the stimulus money, I could see losing up to another 20% at the most in land values. And the interesting thing is that, we really have lost 25 to 30% in land values statewide. And for a lot of people, they haven't necessarily noticed it. Land values have stayed relatively stable since the first big drop off was between 15 and 16. And then between 16 and 19, it's been pretty stable. So for us, it feels like that not much is going on and that the market's actually doing pretty well. And I would argue that it is, all things considered, doing pretty well. It could be much worse. And like you said, without those stimulus dollars, I think that's where we would start to see some problems.
There may be another force at work here, again, as brought up in the webinar. Investors who may be gun-shy about their participation in the stock market, as much of a salvo as that has taken in recent weeks, may turn to land as an alternate investment avenue.
Yes. And so I was speaking to a realtor here in Kansas here about a week ago, and we were talking about just that issue of outside investors, non-Kansas farmer investors in land. And a couple of things have gone on since the COVID-19 has gone into place. And one of those is that most auctions have been canceled or gone online entirely. And when you go online with an auction and you start advertising it to a wider, broader audience than just your local audience, you'll get out-of-state bidders. And this realtor noted that several parcels that they had sold within the last 6 weeks had gone to out-of-state bidders who were investors looking for good farmland that was available. And, that was the comment about the Kansas farmland. Well, it's available. So we wanted to take advantage of it. These folks were from all over the area, but not from Kansas. And so it's an interesting dynamic that we might end up introducing more out-of-state bidders simply by the fact that we are going online with a lot of our auctions exclusively and advertising them wider. I think that there will always be an opportunity for local folks to buy land because there's still a fair amount of land that goes private treaty, to your tenant or to the tenant on first right of refusal. But for people looking for a wider audience of bidders, I think that they're definitely out there and they're going to be looking for land as a hedge in their portfolio for the risk that they're seeing in the stock market.
Well, would have to ask you, as was done on the webinar as well, the proverbial question where land values might in fact trend, all said and done, here in 2020. It's a rather unfair question because of the volatility and uncertainty surrounding agricultural economics right now. But thoughts on that?
Well, I would say that we're still pretty stable, and we're going to stay stable for a little while. The stimulus money is coming in. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was $19 billion stimulus money for farmers from the USDA. And so that money, certainly not all of it's coming to crop producers, but a good chunk of it is. And I think that is going to keep our land markets from going lower than they are. I think it'll keep some stability in the land markets. So I say that we're probably going to be okay for the short term. Where things go in the long run, though, we can't keep getting stimulus checks forever. At some point, we're going to face the music with regard to the commodity prices and the profitability in the sector. And at that point, an adjustment will come in land values if we see that.
The two reports are exceptional resources. That is not an exaggeration. The Kansas county-level land values for Cropland and Pasture fact sheet from K-State Research and Extension, as well as the Kansas Land Values book. And those are posted on agmanager.info for your use. Producers and others take advantage of that. Mykel, as always, good work. We appreciate your time and your input, and take care. Many thanks.
Thanks, sir.
Mykel Taylor, agricultural economist with K-State Research and Extension. Might mention, in addition, that a video of that webinar that we referenced, hosted by Mykel and covering all of this information in quite extensive detail, is posted as well for your viewing at your convenience at agmanager.info, entitled Kansas Land Values and Impacts of COVID-19. You are tuned into Agriculture Today, and we'll stand aside now for these next few minutes. We'll have today's agricultural news headlines for you when we come back, along with this week's edition of the Kansas Soybean Update. Greg Akagi standing by there. And again, this week's K-State Horticulture segment. Please keep it right here on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is the K-State Radio Network, and welcome back to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. On to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. The U.S. House of Representatives is set to vote today on that $484 billion Small Business Administration Emergency Loan Aid Package that the Senate passed back on Tuesday. The $310 billion in new funds for the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program will start flowing within hours after President Trump signs the new aid package into law. Now, the director of the Iowa State University Center for Agricultural Law and Taxation, Christine Tidgren, reiterates the point that the money will again go quickly. She's telling farmers that they need to be ready to act, saying that if you're not working with your lender already, you need to get in and see them as soon as possible and see if this is something that would help you. The first pot of $350 billion hit its limit in just under 2 weeks, with 1.6 million loans approved. The vast majority of loans, 1.2 million, were for $150,000 or less. Now, larger businesses with loans over $1 million accounted for just 4% of the total loans, but received nearly $153 billion of the loan dollars, according to the SBA data. Agriculture accounted for 1.3% of the initial PPP loans, with 46,000 approved in loan numbers for an amount of $4.37 billion. This new legislation includes a special $60 billion carve-out under the PPP for small community banks and credit unions. This will expand access for small businesses that don't have a larger banking lender in their communities. Yet a caveat to that is that the farm credit lenders are eligible for the entire PPP, but not part of the specific $60 billion provision. Farm organizations and agricultural lenders have struggled to get some clarity from the administration about the PPP. For instance, there was a lot of confusion in the beginning over whether farmers were eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program. The SBA did not provide clear guidance on self-employed people qualifying for PPP until 2 days before the money was drained. Then there was confusion among lenders over whether Schedule F forms could be used. So again, according to Tidgren, basically farmers were shut out in large part just because of the confusion and the lack of clarity from Treasury regarding the eligibility of self-employed people and the issue over Schedule F. She went on to say that she feels that the confusion is now largely resolved, and almost all lenders are going along with the thought that they can use a Schedule F instead of a Schedule C. Farm credit institutions say that they have not received any guidance from the SBA on how to translate the Schedule F forms for those PPP applications. Mark Hayes, a spokesman for the Farm Credit Council, said that they've been pushing the SBA for clarity on Schedule F sole proprietors, saying that they've seen guidance related to Schedule C, and they've based the applications off of that guidance. They're saying that they hope the SBA will provide some much-needed answers for farmers and ranchers ahead of the next round of funding. Agricultural interest groups and companies have filed a motion to intervene now in a federal lawsuit that challenges the EPA's interim registration of the herbicide glyphosate. In a motion filed with the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco on Monday, the ag groups say that the intervention is needed because the industry stands to lose an important tool to combat weeds. The motion to intervene was filed by the National Association of Wheat Growers, National Corn Growers Association, National Cotton Council, the American Soybean Association, National Sorghum Producers, the American Farm Bureau Federation, and other groups, along with Monsanto. That action in response to a petition for review filed back in March by the Rural Coalition, Beyond Pesticides, and the Center for Food Safety, among others. Those groups allege that the EPA violated the FIFRA Act when it approved the interim registration and also violated the agency's duties under the Endangered Species Act by not consulting with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or the National Marine Fisheries Service before issuing its interim decision. EPA also notes it's only an interim registration. More data analysis is still required. That's including endangered species assessments under the ESA. The herbicides registration review, which started back in 2009, is now likely to push on into 2021. That's according to the EPA's website. Now for you, this week's edition of the Kansas Soybean Update. Awaiting with that is Greg Akagi. Greg?
Marita Hauser joins us. She is a farmer, but also serves as executive director of the Grant County Chamber of Commerce and Tourism. And Marita, what is the importance of participating in the 2020 census and its effect on rural vitality and development?
There's all kinds of ways it affects us in the rural communities. Kansas receives a lot of money from the census for a lot of things. We get it for health care. Our rural hospitals have got to have the federal funding or we're not going to be able to operate our hospitals. In Kansas, Health and Human Services allocated nearly $2 billion for Medicaid obligations in 2016. Education is another place that it really affects us. And one of the big ways that I think deals with agriculture is the way we feed our kids. In Kansas, 46.4% of public school children are enrolled in the free or reduced lunch program. So that's like $137 million that is coming, and those are ag products. Those are things that we eat, and that's provided then to our schools, to our kids. Another thing, the federal aid program for public schools, just for the public education piece of it, Kansas received $109 million in Title I grants in fiscal year 2016. So again, that's all based on census numbers. How that's allocated to the state comes from the census. That's why it's so extremely important that we count everybody.
Agriculture is such a vital part of rural Kansas and other areas. That's why it's so important.
Without agriculture, our economy in Kansas flat doesn't run. And we've got to have the people in our rural areas to produce the food, the fuel, the fiber that we all use every day. And if we don't count everybody, those dollars are going somewhere else. If 1% of the Kansas population is uncounted in the 2020 census, the state of Kansas could miss receiving over $600 million in federal funding over a 10-year period. That's a lot of money for our budget.
And Marita, what's the best way for them to participate in the census?
People who get their mail delivered at their house should have received a postcard with a code on it. If you didn't receive that, or if you received your mail at a post office box, go to 2020census.gov, and there's a respond there. Now, it will ask you for the code, but if you don't have the code, there's another link that you click, and it will take you into the census where you put your address in.
That is Marita Hauser, who is a farmer and serves as executive director of the Grant County Chamber of Commerce and Tourism. She joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Thanks, Greg. And this is Agriculture Today.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus. So if you have a fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going in. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
For this week's horticulture segment on Agriculture Today, we go down the internet line to Johnson County Extension Horticultural Agent Dennis Patton, who is receiving, sensibly enough given our times, a flood of questions about raising vegetable crops in containers. And Dennis, you might elaborate on why there's such a surge in interest in this, but it has to do with people's limitations as far as their gardening space, right?
Right. I think there's a number of reasons you're seeing people gravitate to containers. First of all, whenever there's a crisis in this country, we tend to turn to vegetable gardening. You know, we go back to World War I, Victory Gardens of World War II, and even the economic crash of 2008. People started gardening again. This time, though, a lot of more people are doing it quickly. You know, it's a quick decision to start vegetable gardening. And a lot more people have downsized and they just don't have space. And so containers offer a lot of flexibility. You know, pretty quick, pretty easy to set up, not all that cost and investment, and a fairly rapid rate of return. So, you know, as people are looking for fresh, nutritious, they know where their foods come from, they know who's touched it in the process, they're gravitating towards containers, and for good reason. You can get a lot of food in a small space.
Can one successfully grow our wide variety of vegetables in containers? Are there any limitations there, Dennis?
You know, I think the limitations really get back more to the same as with regular gardening, that is location. Growing in a container is really the same as growing in the ground, except in a pot. So first of all, if you want to do crops that require sunlight, like a tomato, you're going to need at least 6 hours of full sun to grow that tomato. So if you're on a balcony, a north patio, that's probably going to work for tomatoes. Really, the limitation is how much space you have. And then the pot size, because depending on the crop, the bigger the root mass, the bigger the plant, the bigger the pot you're going to need. I mean, you can do anything from some lettuce or spinach in a little, 6-inch, 12-inch flower pot to a tomato plant that's probably going to need at least, 10 gallons, 5 to 10 gallons of soil mass, especially to produce that big slicing type tomato everyone wants. Little cherry tomatoes can get by a little bit smaller. And of course, you need to be creative about staking, caging, those type of things to save space also in containers.
The type of vegetable will determine whether or not you can grow one or more transplants in a given pot then, right?
Correct. So, a good example, and maybe at this point in time, since we're now into almost the warm season crops getting planted, the tomatoes, the peppers, we're kind of past the spring salad crops moving in here to the 1st of May. But if you have a nice sized container, I always like to reference the old half whiskey barrel that a lot of people can visualize really easy. In that whiskey barrel, you could save space in the middle for a nice big like celebrity tomato plant. But then all around that in the spring, you could have had lettuce, spinach, radishes, maybe even some onions. But you left that little, coffee can size hole in the center to plant that tomato plant. But then you were harvesting all those other crops before the tomato plant got up big. So almost like in your own garden, you're double cropping that pot. Personally, I've done broccoli in containers. I've done lettuce, spinach, peppers grow really nice. I like to do cucumbers in a container too, but you have to have some sort of trellis, some sort of obelisk, something to help support that vine to grow upright so it's not spreading all over your patio. You probably don't want that to have happen.
And one quick footnote here, when you get into those larger containers, larger pots, folks need to remember that once you load them up with growing medium and the plants, those are going to end up quite heavy. So you better think in terms of those being stationary for a while.
Correct. Yeah. These containers are going to be heavy. And, we need to probably mention more about the container. We talked about the size, right, but one most important part for it to be a container for anything, it's got to have adequate drainage holes because you're going to be putting a lot of water through this, watering these plants. You got to have that drainage, just like in our good garden soil. We always talk about a well-drained soil. You still need that. And then when we use the word soil, in many ways, we're not talking about digging up some dirt out of your backyard and throwing the container because our heavy clay contents just don't drain well. So in many cases, what we're talking about is buying a commercially made potting mix, which really doesn't have any soil or dirt in it. It has more like sphagnum peat moss, vermiculite, perlite, coconut coir, pine bark fines, those type of things that's mixed so it holds a lot of water, but also holds a lot of oxygen for healthy root development.
Very important point in succeeding with container gardening. In as far as raising the plants, though, it's pretty much standard procedure with respect to watering, fertilization, and the like?
Correct. On a container, you are going to have to water more frequently. And the nice thing about larger containers is you're less a slave to watering. And the other probably key to success with the container gardens are going to be proper fertilization because that water leaches a lot of those nutrients through. And so I recommend just get on a regular, like a water-soluble fertilizer or some other program that's kind of ideally suited for container gardens. Or you can use a little garden fertilizer, on a nice size, 24-inch pot, 5-gallon pot, maybe a teaspoon or two of a 10-10-10 fertilizer once a month, every 6 weeks, should go ahead and supplement those nutrients and get those plants off and growing for a successful harvest.
Well, the encouragement is there for those who have the desire to grow vegetables, don't have the garden space, but would like to give this a try. This is a fairly simple procedure to succeed with, is it not, Dennis?
It is. And, Eric, we always conclude these talks by referencing back to some K-State material literature. And K-State has 2 excellent publications. Everyone that loves vegetable gardening or thinking about it should download is the Kansas Garden Guide. And it's just simple, just to Google or search Kansas Garden Guide, and it always pops up first. And it's kind of the A to Z Bible for vegetable gardening in Kansas. And then there's also one called Growing Vegetables in Containers or Growing Vegetables in Pots. It's an older publication, but it has 3 or 4 little plant combos, what to mix together, size of pots, those type of things. And both of those are great reference materials. And the other thing, I know this is a little off topic, but just popped up. I'm also a big fan of what I call incorporating vegetables into the landscape. So instead of putting a 6-pack of petunias in, put a pepper plant in, put in some green beans. You don't even need a vegetable garden. You've already got space probably already worked up from something else, or you got that old tired looking shrub, yank it out, put some tomatoes in. Garden doesn't have to be like Grandma and Grandpa's, 40 by 40 plot with 3-foot rows. They can take on all sizes and shapes these days.
Can be a great landscape accent. Check out those sources of information that Dennis just cited there at the K-State Horticulture website. Very good information to use as you embark on container vegetable gardening. Good time to get started in that. And we appreciate the input. As always, Dennis, many thanks to you.
Thanks, Eric.
He is the Johnson County Extension Horticultural Agent, and along with us for our K-State Horticulture segment, that's Dennis Patton. As our Thursday edition comes to a close, our thanks to you, as always, for being along with us. Eric Atkinson, bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.